Hey everybody, Dan here. Whether you're a first-time viewer or returning subscriber, this is Gaming Gods with Dad Bods. And if you caught my last update, I had a big problem with ClipChamp and had a lot of issues recovering my projects. I was able to start getting them back, but then when you're looking at all the media that was imported into the program, every time I would click on it, when it was looking for a file, it would just either take forever or sometimes it wasn't even loading it. So I'm trying to move on into a new program and I'm going to try out a few. I was hoping to wait till around episode 20, take a break, and then maybe explore other programs that I could use to edit and cut clips for the channel. And I guess it's coming a little bit prematurely. So this week, I'm going to get part 2 of the Alienwares Have Crash Landed series. Can I fix them? We're on part 2 of the Aurora R10, and we're basically going to be skipping a lot of the reassembly process for now. I'll probably do similar to the Frankenstein build where I start putting a little bit of segments together through the process and uploading them once I get a little bit more familiar with the new programs, because it will take a lot of time to really trim all that all over again. So I apologize for that. So basically going to give you the final product, and I'll give you a little bit of update on how we got there. So assembly went really well. No major issues. The only thing with the Aurora R10, and you'll see momentarily once I open it back up, it's a little bit cramped on the inside, especially once you factor in the extra tubing for the CPU core on the AIO, along with the modular power supply. Once you close that all up, it gets a little bit cramped. I had to really kind of finagle it to make it work right. But other than that, assembly was very fine. I actually got it to boot on the first try, no issues, no warning codes, no nothing. Some of the issues that I did encounter post that was XMP profiles cause a lot of freezing and crashing. I don't know if that's necessarily a problem with the motherboard, or more so my RAM isn't like super compatible with Alienware's motherboard to do that. And I tried different profiles and it kept coming in the same result. Either it wouldn't like boot up and I'd have to basically reset the CMOS, or I get into Windows and it would freeze and then say like it restored the memory back to factory setting, confirm, and it would boot fine. So I think there's some work to do there with the memory to get it right, to actually run at the correct speed, because it's running slower than it's clocked for. So I'll have to explore that option a little bit further down the road. Once I actually got Windows installed, I had an issue on reboot that I couldn't find the OS anymore. And after several tries, moving memory around, swapping it out, going down to 1 DIMM, it still gave me problems booting or finding the OS. Swapped out the power supply, making sure that that was, not the problem, and it turned out that the power supply is fine. Using one of my spares, resulted in me actually thinking about that the hard drive was probably the issue the whole time. And sure enough, with the NVme drives that you slide them in and kind of screw them down, I think I didn't have it in there properly. I reseated it, and I didn't tighten it down as much. I loosened it just a little bit than I did before. And sure enough, I reloaded the OS just to be safe because it booted. But, I just wanted to make sure that, with all the issues, that it wasn't properly writing, with all the drivers and the Windows updates I was putting in there. I wanted to make sure that it was done properly. So I did a fresh install, no issues, loaded up all the drivers. Then sure enough, I kind of shelved it for a couple weeks before I got back to finishing, the final build, installing games and the capture software. Sure enough, I installed the Windows updates that were for Windows 10 that, while it was offline for those weeks, and it crashed. I couldn't recover it. The checkpoints didn't work. Doing a system repair through the disk or through the boot up options didn't work either. Using the recovery partition, that didn't work. That was in there. Like, none of the options did. It wouldn't boot to like a safe mode, so I got frustrated again and had to reinstall Windows right after I literally had just captured some of the footage, so that was kind of frustrating. But needless to say, got it back up and running. It's running fine and beautifully ever since. I created the side cover for it, and all seems to be working very good right now. There are a few issues that you'll see in the gameplay footage, which you'll see momentarily. But right now, let's go in and take a quick closer look at where we're at. All right, so Here we are taking a little bit closer look at the Aurora R10. We're going to move in closer to the side panel and show you what I did here, and then fire her up momentarily. You can see how fast she boots. So looking at the panel, it's basically need nothing more of a piece of cardboard wrapped in duct tape, and I was able to get some two-sided Velcro adhesive from some of my guitar pedal panels, and as you can see, it just peels off pretty nice. And then looking inside, as I told you, the wires here get really cramped, and you know, you got the main power supply to the motherboard, and that's all running underneath this guy that swings out. And of course, you got all this space nice down here for extra cables, but you know, everything for the CPU power, the motherboard power, and then the liquid cooling that runs up into the north side of, you know, the top part of the tower, you know, it gets cramped really fast, especially when you close this down. So I'll get to some of my thoughts on the case overall going through this experience to share with you guys. And right now we'll come back here and fire up. You get to see a little bit of LED action. But that's the power, boots up, lights up purple. And then coming here, let me kill this light because I don't think it's necessary anymore. We should get our Alienware splash screen. And then right there, log in. You know, boots right into the desktop. It comes up so fast. It's really nice. As should a fresh install on more modern hardware should be. And yeah, you know, like I said, you know, since I've worked through all the little problems with this thing, it's been a long journey, but here we are. And now I'm going to get you some game footage. We're going to show some Resident Evil Village, Halo Infinite, and Hunt the Showdown. So we'll come back momentarily. We'll do a wrap up and a final thoughts.
Start. him in tatters.
Enemy shields down.
Gain the lead.
They'll be feeling that one tomorrow. Left him in tatters.
Enemy shields down.
Killing spree.
Racking up the accolades. Another one dusted.
So let's do a quick recap here of the performance that we just saw. So you saw Resident Evil Village, you saw Hunt the Showdown, and you saw Halo Infinite. Now overall, my consensus is the performance is pretty good. Now 1616 Super is a card that's starting to show its age, in the 1080p realm, and I think it's still holding up pretty good for how old that card is. So when you look at Resident Evil Village, you are seeing a consistent frames per second north of 60, 60 to 70. Sometimes it'll jump up into like the 80s or 90s, but it doesn't stay there very long. For some reason, those 1% lows were definitely not right, and that's Afterburner, so I don't know why it's not showcasing that a little bit better. But for overall at medium settings, which medium settings for all these games are the recommended settings based off of what the game provided. Nothing's cranked to the, nothing's cranked all the way up, nothing's, dialed all the way down. I figure middle road is pretty good to kind of show where this is, probably going to find the best sweet spot for overall performance. So, frames per second across the board, I don't think was an issue. The other titles were north of 100 for the most part, and those are online games. A lot of times you'll even turn the settings even further down, so the frame rates will go up. For some reason, I'm getting like a sound stutter, and I don't know if that's driver related or just because I'm trying to capture it on the Nvidia software. I don't remember that happening when I was using it to capture Hunt the Showdown, a few years back, just capturing kill clips, and trying to piece them together, just for fun. But that's something that, that's an issue that I want to look into and explore, just make sure the drivers are good. Maybe it's something in the in-game settings, but I noticed it wasn't happening in Hunt the Showdown, so that's kind of odd. But that was the last game that I actually did record from the game footage. I didn't record that on the same day, so I don't know if maybe there were some background processes. That's something also I didn't think about till after the fact. Any Windows updates or software updates going on in the background during the captioning, that could obviously hinder the footage that you saw. But definitely want to explore what's going on with the audio issue, if that's something that's just because of the capturing, or if I have another problem, driver related. But those benchmarks, the temperature wise, it looks like the CPU cooler is doing its job. It's it's keeping the 5800 nice and cool, no issue there. The graphics card is maxed out at like 97%, for the most part. CPU usage is 40-50% most of the time, from what I saw, so that's good. So overall, it's doing its job. Obviously, if I threw more memory into it, I threw in a better, more modern graphics card, the performance is just going to climb up. But when you factor in how I approach this project, I don't think it's struggling, or it's not undervalued at all. So, and what I mean by that is, you know, basically, you know, with a $5 fix, using some cardboard from the other shipping box for the Area 51 to solve my side panel, and then a little screen from one of my other towers, you know, that the side panel is not a problem anymore. You know, $127 for the tower with the motherboard and the power supply, $120 for the Ryzen 5800, and then I think it was like another $70 for the 1 terabyte NVme storage. So I'm in it all together for around 3 1/4, give or take, right? 127 plus, what did I say? 127 plus about 120, that's 250-ish. And then, you know, 250 plus another $70 or so. It's like 220. Factor in the tax, it's about like 225, 230 all together. And then if you really want to get, you know, picky with the prices, you know, that memory probably ran me about $100 when I bought it brand new. It's 16 gigs of 3600, and then the graphics card back when I bought it was probably around 220. So if you want to factor that into the price, but obviously you're not using used prices or modern prices, you know, you're looking at about $600 or so, around there, maybe a little bit north, you know, using prices from when I bought stuff new years ago, and factoring into what I just bought used. If you were looking at the used prices, obviously that memory would probably cost you $50. A 1616 Super, I think you can get for under $100. So you think about that, you're about a four, you know, that would be between a $400 and $500 build altogether if you're going completely used market for everything, soup to nuts. So overall, I think this was, you know, from the Alienware standpoint, assembly, building it was a positive experience. You know, getting this footage captured and out to you guys is a whole nother story, which I'll get out to you, similar to like the Frankenstein build with doing some segments. It is, you know, it was literally like about 3 hours or so of footage altogether that I was gonna try to squish into about 25 minutes, and then throw the game capture stuff in there, and then do a quick wrap up here. But you know, overall, I'm happy with what I got. You know, as far as improvements, obviously, if I could score a better graphics card in the 1080p range for cheap, I'd probably throw it in here to help my cause. I definitely want to get at least 32 gigs of memory, you know, because of all the video stuff I'm going to be doing. That'll only help this out even more. But I did do one video edit on here. I did the CRT, the eMachine CRT video. That was all cut and done on here. So and it did fine. No issue with import and export times. Everything seemed pretty on par. I know that wasn't a super intense video of meshing a million clips together, but it did fine on there. I didn't capture that. I should have captured you know, seeing how well it did, you know, moving video parts, cutting, splicing, adding transitions around, just to kind of show you that, but I didn't capture it. You know, so overall, I think this was a win, you know, for about 3 1/4 plus used parts that I had, you know, just laying around the house collecting dust that I've been procrastinating, wanted to throw up on Marketplace just to sell and get an extra few bucks in my pocket. But, you know, in terms, I was glad I held on to them. So, you know, I'm very pleased where I got here. Obviously, it wasn't the easiest journey, but, you know, once, you know, you see stuff like mouse poop inside, you know, I had this, give it a cleaning, because I didn't want to risk anything still being in there that could cause harm. So giving everything a good scrub, you know, was definitely worth the time and effort. And now, you know, I'm going to slowly start seeing the payoff here. You know, now as far as recommending doing this at home, if you know what you're doing as far as PC building or want to get into PC building, could be a very good road, you know, to learn how to do it. You don't have to take the road that I did, but you could obviously take older generations hardware that are dirt cheap, you know, and do your homework. You know, get a cheap motherboard, get a cheap CPU. A lot of people will give you a combo of, you know, memory, motherboard, a CPU, and a cooler for, you know, dirt cheap. You know, you go get a tower, whether it's an old one or a new one, pair it with a power supply. You know, I would say if you're gonna buy anything new and try to learn how to do it, you know, get a good get a good, decent power supply. Don't take a risk on used stuff, because that I've seen people give these away to people and they don't work right, and that just causes, you know, delays on getting it running, and you're beating your head thinking it's motherboard related or whatnot. So if I had one recommendation, you know, if you do an experiment like this, you know, get a good working power supply. Make sure that works above all. You know, everything else might be a gamble as far as if it's used. You know, if people claim that it's tested, you know, ask if they have screenshots from when it was tested. You know, that never hurts. You know, get proof that it was working. You know, as far, you know, that's my thoughts on doing a similar project like this. You know, you can save a lot of money by buying someone's old PC or generation older, because there's always people out there that want to buy the newest stuff, you know, every couple of years and spend a good penny doing it, and then they'll leave something like this. Like I said, like a fully working one, I've seen them go for, you know, $500 or so. And funny enough, talking about this in general, you know, as I was always looking for marketplace for this stuff, this came up while looking for the Area 51, and that's where I kind of said, screw it, I'll take a shot on it, see if it works, or I can get it working. But you know, I've seen these Alienware chassis, just the tower itself, you know, with the front panel, no motherboard, no components, you know, as low as 40-50 bucks. It was very tempting to do it just to get myself a side panel, but then I'm stuck with a tower, and I didn't really want to go down that road. But I've seen these still go for somewhere, you know, anywhere from $500 to $800 fully configured. Now the components inside are, you know, you got to make sure you ask what's inside, and then do your homework if you don't know what they're talking about, to do, you know, to give value to the price. You know, this is only a generation old now. The graphics card isn't, but you know, the CPU, everything up, DDR4 memory, you know, you can still clearly game on it, and this is 1080p on a very old card. So you know, when I tell you that my PC, which is very similar spec wise, but 6800, you know, 32 gigs of RAM, you know, that thing runs a lot of stuff even in 2K north of 100 frames for the most part, you know, on high or ultra high settings. You know, the AAA titles it crushes, you know, easily. So, you know, I know I kind of built like a second machine, but really, you know, it's going to serve a different purpose. You know, this is going to be my content creator. Once I get the last bit of content off my machine over to this guy, you know, I'll move all my edits fully over to here, and then clean up my PC that's long overdue for everything from fresh install, you know, file organization, physical clean out. You know, it's been long overdue to do all that. So it'll be good to take my time taking care of my PC while I can run off of this one to do more content for the channel. Now, as far as my overall opinion of Alienware, I'm going to hold off on that for now. I'll just leave it as I have some positive and negatives to take away from this, and nothing really against Alienware by any means. You know, I want to see what, you know, over, you know, at this point 15 years ago looks like, as far as, you know, quality, sensibility, price, performance, you know, coming out of the Area 51 versus, you know, what would come out of something like this. You know, and I have an idea specifically to what this one was built for originally before I acquired it, because my PC was very similar spec, you know, as far as the graphic card and the CPU. You know, I have a 5600, this came with a 5800, and that's what I pretty much put back in here. So I know spec-wise, you know, how it would have performed now back in 2021. I don't know the exact cost on it, but it was definitely north of $1,000. I would have to imagine. I don't know what the final cost would be with the specs that it was, you know, that was put into it. I know what I spent on my rig collectively, but I also factored in a new mouse, keyboard, and a new 2K monitor. You know, that all factored into the price. So obviously, I spent a pretty penny on mine. I imagine Alienware charged a pretty penny on something like this. And, you know, we'll talk more about that stuff, you know, with pre-builds and Alienwares as, you know, the channel evolves and we get more into the next part of the Aurora, you know, the Alienware series here. But, you know, guys, you know, hope you enjoyed this. Sorry it's not the full version. I will get that footage out to you when I can as I learn a new program and how it all works. But, you know, I want to know your thoughts, you know, doing a project like this, you know, a mixed bag of new parts, old parts, or, you know, just throwing old parts together that you find off the internet to to build a competent rig that can do the task at hand, whether it's gaming, content creation, you know, just browsing the internet, you know, or just using like office applications to have a PC around the house to check your email. You know, let me know if you've done any similar projects like this. You know, if you're more curious about, you know, this sort of stuff, I can obviously roll out some more topics in this realm. And, you know, if anybody wants help trying to do this on your own, you know, reach out. You know, I'll be more than happy to help you pick out parts and what to look for. You know, and obviously I'll share more of my experiences of like what to look for when you buy used electronics in general, where to spend, where not to overspend, you know, and definitely, you know, search multiple markets in that regard. So if you like what you see, you know, guys, you know, I thank you for tuning in. You know, hit that like, you know, drop me a comment on what your thoughts are. And, you know, as always, my name is Dan. This is Gaming Guys with Dad Bods, and I'll see you next time.